Welcome back, everyone, to RoomPack's ResEdChat podcast. If you're new to the show, every other week, we are featuring a variety of topics of interest to hired professionals who work in and with university housing, residence life, residence education, whatever you might call it. All are welcome here. So we are graced by the presence of greatness, recent president of ACPA and a very prolific podcaster. We're going to talk all about all of that with our guest today. Heather, if you want to introduce yourself and give a little kind of brief professional background, because I feel like, I do that in just a bit, but like I've known of you for a very long time. You do amazing work, and especially now, just like love that you're podcasting and doing a bunch of cool stuff. So I guess summarize it as best you can. If you want to just, introduce yourself to our audience, give a brief overview of your professional background.
Well, thank you so much, Dustin. I am so grateful for the opportunity to be on the ResEd Chat podcast, and it's going to be such a fun conversation. So, Heather Shea, she/her pronouns. I work at Michigan State University, which is on the lands of the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy. There, I work as the director of an office advancing women and gender equity. I've joked that I always defined myself as a student affairs generalist, but recently went through and started counting up the years. I'm like, spent almost more than half of my career doing women and gender equity work. So turns out I might be a bit of a specialist in that particular area. And been working in student affairs and higher education, DEI spaces since 2000 when I graduated with my master's degree from Colorado State University. So that's a little bit. I'm sure we'll get into the much broader scope of all of the intricacies in between there and here. But yeah, that's kind of the overview.
Yeah, and I think that is part of the folks who really have kind of like committed from the long haul, especially like within sort of whatever their area of specialization and stuff. So like it's just, when you think, if it is like residence education, you might think of a particular person or, folks who like have really like made that commitment. So I think that's really great. And I know part of sort of just the nature of your work and sort of wanting, I think, to talk about things that matter and talk about, people's stories and uplift them and bring in diverse voices and all that. You are one of the collaborators. I know there's a group of folks that are all working together to do the Student Affairs Now podcast. And if you just want to talk about that, sort of like what the sort of genesis of it was and just sort of like, I guess the elevator pitch of it, if folks aren't aware, they should definitely go check it out. But if you want to kind of compel them towards it, like what do y'all talk about, or what do you, I guess, specifically talk about? Because I feel like you all kind of have different tracks, like you and your like other co-hosts and stuff, which is really cool.
Yeah, no, we definitely do. So the genesis of Student Affairs Now actually started with a different podcast, Student Affairs Live, which I think Hired Live is still a network on the air. I don't know. They're doing other things. They went off the air for a while, and at the time it was October 2020. So what were we all doing? We were all like, maybe not like the novelty of the pandemic had kind of, worn off a little, or maybe we were just like, okay, what else can we do? How can we bring some free professional development opportunities to folks who work in student affairs and higher ed, and those who work adjacent, right? So, I mean, I think the scope has really been those who work in, around, and alongside student affairs and higher education. But my good friend Keith Edwards and I were colleagues, good friends, actually cohort mates at Colorado State University in our master's program. So some people know that, others don't. But both Glenn, Susanna, Keith, and I, the original four, were all Colorado State Sahi alums. So when Keith and I stayed in touch over the years, we were like, wouldn't it be cool to do our own podcast? And as we kind of started thinking through logistics, we started like, okay, we really want a faculty member. What about Susanna? We really want somebody who's just interestingly curious about kind of being a practitioner at a director level. And so we brought in Glenn. And so since then, we've added 2 additional hosts, and the podcast Student Affairs Now has reached over 200 episodes. Over 200 episodes at this point. My focus is kind of all over the place, but I'd say if there was a through line, it probably is in the space of diversity, equity, inclusion, gender equity work, leadership development, social change. That's probably what I tend to focus on. I also did a series on how to identify whether or not student affairs is the right career for you, and then how to find a master's program. And that was really specifically because I was having a lot of conversations with undergraduates on my campus about what was the nature of this field and how do you find yourself in it. And of course, during that, kind of told my own origin story of how I found student affairs, which I think is always kind of so maybe that's our next question. I can unpack that a little bit more. So yeah, so student affairs now has been really a labor of love. It's a passion project. Keith and I and the other co-hosts, we all meet weekly to talk and plan and think about kind of what we want to explore. We have no shortage of ideas. We have way more topics than we ever will get to, but some of the most incredible conversations with people both in as well as book authors outside of higher ed. It's been a lot of fun. So have no plans to stop doing it at any point. So
Yeah, onward to the next 200 episodes, and yeah, I mean, I love that sort of like the consistency, the variety, and all of that. I think is really important, and that just original hypothesis, or the sort of genesis of the idea of providing sort of free professional development to people. Like that was sort of the idea of like my original show that I also have no intention of stopping, Higher Ed Geek. Of like that's led to other amazing, cool opportunities to continue like working with folks as a content creator and everything, because I do just really firmly believe exactly that point. So it's just like, okay, well, let's have this, show over here that's way more sort of niche focused of, residence education. Let's have other ones that are just bringing different perspectives on, higher ed writ large or student affairs specifically. And so, yeah, it's a fun world to play in. And I think it does help to, yeah, just have kind of like for me, like this like diverse diet of shows in my feed that I like maybe just cherry pick episodes where it's like, oh, that's really interesting to me and all that. But it's like it's all kind of synthesizing together to kind of inform my perspective of what's going on and how we sort of are approaching today's challenges and everything. But again, sort of like I guess like doubling down on sort of your career and sort of commitment to this work and sort of contributing to it through yeah, like Hired Live and a variety of things that you've been involved with and everything. You were recently the president of ACPA, this sort of guiding organization for the entire field. So I feel like this is kind of like a funny question or way to frame it. I guess it like depends on like where you put the emphasis of like when I was like talking to people about having this interview. It's like that idea of like how did you become ACPA president? Like, and I say that less so of like how did you become ACPA president? It's like how. Like the emphasis is on the how because like I'm curious like how something like that works. Of like did you approach it? Did they approach you? Like what is sort of the whole sort of I guess like evaluation process of like actually being confirmed as like as quickly I guess as you can kind of summarize how all of that works. Like how did it happen?
yeah, oh my gosh. Well, first, I'll just say it was truly the professional bucket list, honor of my career to be in that role for the year. I'm still past president, and still have a role on our leadership council for this remaining year. So, Rachel Aho, current ACPA president, is doing amazing work. If you haven't already interviewed her, she's a housing person, so I think she would be perfect for this podcast. But actually, my connection to ACPA goes way back to grad school. My master's advisor, Paul Shong, was really instrumental in my initial getting connected to ACPA because he invited me to present with him at a conference. And so it was my second year of my master's program. Paul had been really involved in ACPA throughout his career leading up, and so invited me to present. And then ever since then, Paul and I would have kind of this annual dinner. And he started really early on saying, well, when you're ACPA president, oh, and by the way, Paul also past president. So he served from 2002 to 2003. And so we would have this annual dinner and he'd be like, well, when you're ACPA president, when you're ACPA president. And sometimes, we're a really interesting field in that we have a lot of folks who almost need to have their shoulder tapped multiple times to see themselves moving into that type of role. I was probably primed in the because Paul saw something in me. I was excited about the opportunity. Um, but then, life happens, right? I moved multiple times. I had two kids. I got, you know, got through like a variety of different career transitions, came to Michigan State to work on my PhD, and really at that point kind of took a break from professional association involvement. I had served on the convention planning team and I had been on the governing board as a director of membership development, but was like, okay, I need to focus on my specific academic pursuit at this point in time, which was getting my doctorate. And it was as I was on my way finishing that, I got a call about leading the Next Gen Institute. So, Next Gen is an ACPA institute that's focused on bringing undergraduate students into the field. And so, this also relates, of course, to that other topic that I just mentioned about the podcast. But how do we as a profession, like both introduce the field to students, but also help professional association involvement kind of align with that? So I had the opportunity to co-chair Next Gen for 2 years with a really good friend of mine, Richie Stevens. And it was right after that I kind of got the nomination to apply to become to be considered, right, by the Nominations and Elections Committee. And I turned it down actually the first time because I was still kind of in this like, do I really, have the time to do this? Do I have the energy? I just started my current position. And the next year when it came around, I was like, okay, I'll put in my application. But I had this crisis of confidence actually at the very last minute. And Chris Moody, the executive director of ACPA, will attest to this story. Like the day that the applications were due, I texted Chris, we're good friends, and I said, hey, Chris, you're about to get my application for director of professional development. And he's like, wait, what? Like, he's like, can you Zoom for a minute? And so he's like, Heather, we talked about you applying. And so I was like, okay, I'll put it in for both of the two positions. You all can make the choice. And so I was really, like, really at that point, kind of thinking, is this something that could I really be of service? And then when I was elected, just really excited to jump into the role. The unique opportunity to be president of an association is it's a once in a lifetime kind of chance. So
Yeah, I guess that's really interesting, that idea of, like, I appreciate you kind of sharing authentically sort of that, like, emotional journey you went on to, like, get there, because I think it could be that idea of, like, knowing, I guess, like, we all have egos or ambitions or whatever. Like, if that idea of like that shoulder tap finally comes and you are almost just like, yes, finally, like, I've been waiting for this moment. And like the idea that you might be like, I don't know, maybe not right now. And it's like, that's incredible to have that sort of like self awareness of like, I respect this enough. I don't want to be able to like, commit to it fully, or, not just sort of have this be like, because it could be, I guess, in the sense of like you said, like, oh, well, this was sort of a bucket list item. Some people could just view it as that. It's like, well, I just want that sort of like that check mark, that sort of thing that I can brag about or whatever, but they're not really like, they don't have the time or the full understanding of like what that responsibility kind of fully entails. So it might be like they kind of fumble through it, or it's kind of stressful and they kind of, whatever, that you, I guess, part of, I guess, maybe your sort of calculation was like what you're talking about of like, well, I want to finish my PhD. I just got this position. I want to sort of settle in and, like, so I guess kudos to you for like recognizing that, being patient, and like, because I guess there'd be that anxiety of like, well, if they say no, like, is the opportunity ever going to come back or what? They're going to be like, well, she doesn't want to do it. She turned us down or whatever, like, so that's really great. And I guess like, yeah, we're recording this April 2024. So yeah, you're in the past president position. You have, kind of turn that page on that chapter of like actually being in the presidency. So what are some reflections or highlights or just kind of like cool things maybe that you like got to do, I guess, from like this past year?
yeah. So I mean, I think the very top of the list is the fact that ACPA is in the middle of celebrating its 100th anniversary. So 2024, um, ACPA was established, founded in 1924 by 9 women who came together at the invitation of another association to build a space that was inclusive and collaborative. And that association then later turned into ACPA. So being able to tell that story alongside the work that I do within gender equity spaces is really kind of cool. And then the 100th anniversary in and of itself, right? So our convention in Chicago in March was at the same place where ACPA was founded, and just returning to Chicago was such an incredible opportunity. We had a big party. It was open to everybody. There was no like ticket fee that people had to pay to get in. And then we're going to be having another celebration on ACPA Day in October, which is the official like sign the charter kind of day. So I'd say that's probably the biggest highlight of the year. We also, there's some behind the scenes stuff that happened in the association that is really evident to folks who are involved in ACPA and who are engaged in leadership roles, but maybe isn't as like, prominent to the larger field. And that is that we went through a major governance transformation. So we completely remade our leadership council. So it was a governing board. It's now a leadership council. For a lot of folks, that might be like, okay, what is the really big difference? What we really did was we widened opportunities for folks to get involved and created a whole slew of additional roles, which really aligns with ACPA's values of inclusion and leadership that's more dispersed. So that was a huge lift in and of itself, right? So you're transitioning, not just writing. So as vice president, I got to work on the bylaws revision, which people are like, woo, that sounds really exciting. We're working on the bylaws revision. So work on the bylaws revision, that passed. And then at the convention in March, we switched over to this new model. So we are now kind of living into that. But being a part of both shaping the celebration of the 100th as well as shaping the leadership of the association moving forward was really exciting. I mean, this was certainly also a really challenging year for higher ed, right? I mean, especially in DEI spaces. So, I wouldn't say this is a highlight, but I think an important part of what we were able to contribute was to build community spaces around support for those colleagues who are in states where DEI is under attack. So that was the focus of my presidential symposium with ASH. We brought in colleagues from NADAHE and some state organizations to kind of think together about how we can support folks who are working in states where DEI is really at risk of being, actually is being completely closed and defunded, and offices and people are losing jobs and that kind of thing. So those are some of the things that I'd say kind of rise to the top of the list. And then just working alongside an incredible group of leaders who are all committed to, kind of seeing the best and transforming and boldly moving this association and this profession forward.
Yeah, I get the impression that like anybody who steps into some sort of leadership position with like a professional organization like ACBA, like I feel like you have to have some inherent optimism. Like you feel as though there is a benefit for people coming together, thinking and collaborating and like all of that, like that's just that the power of that community is important and you want to like work to make it, better and all that. So yeah, I mean it is like incredible opportunity to like be helping to ring in the 100th anniversary and everything and celebrate that. And then like you said, it is unfortunate that these things are happening, but it is sort of like, you know, that you're grateful to have the opportunity to, kind of stand with this organization, sort of bring its collective weight to be in response to the moment, because it could be like, well, we're these sort of like high-minded academics or whatever. We're just going to talk about whatever we want to talk about. It's like, no, like we're here. Like, and I think that idea of like, we are every year and in a lot of different ways throughout the entire year, trying to be responsive to what's happening and have those conversations that folks can, kind of get something out of. And, yeah, so I think that is something. I mean, for any kind of these communities and stuff, like the better ones, I think are trying to be adaptive to those things that are happening. And like you said, yeah, like higher ed has no shortage of challenges. So the idea of like I think it could be tough at this point, I guess, is like, which challenge are we going to focus on? I'm going to talk about like affordability or this, that, the other thing. And it's like, ACPA, I think is, a pretty big tent. There is room for everybody, but I think very important. And I'm glad that, yeah, like it seems like it was, destiny or whatever you might call it. It's like that you were in the position to be like, you know what, we're going to be talking about this. This is really important. Like, it's a very impactful thing, like for the profession. Because I feel like maybe like the affordability stuff, it's like, yes, important. I don't know like what we're necessarily going to do about it. We could be like, college should be more affordable, and it's like that's up to like presidents of colleges, university, like it's kind of boards of trustees or whatever else. But so I think yeah, it's really great that you were able to give that a lot of space, give that a lot of emphasis and focus, and um,
I'll say one other thing about that actually before you move the next thing, but um, when I was thinking about what I wanted to say, right? So one of the things that the president gets to do is give a presidential address at the moment that they take the gavel, right? So that actually happened for me in New Orleans last year, and so I was thinking a little bit about what I wanted to say, and I'd been working on this speech, and I kind of started off thinking like, oh, well, what would sound kind of presidential and what would sound like, this is a momentous occasion for our association and that kind of thing. And I was like, okay, none of that is really me. That's not Heather, right? And so I kind of went back to this, like, what is it? What is the message that I want our field to kind of be considering at this moment in time? Um, and I stumbled upon, actually, this is totally credit to Keith, because Keith and I have this ongoing back and forth, and he shared with me a reference to a book called that was about fostering critical hope. And there's actually two different scholars who have written on this pretty extensively. We featured both of them, actually. There was Keith got to do a podcast with them, so lucky him. Um, but when I stumbled upon the concept, I was like, okay, this is the rallying cry. This is the focus for our field at this moment, because I've always been an optimist, but I've always been a realist optimist, right? Like the type of person who, recognizes the challenges that we're facing as a field, and also sees value in us doing the work anyway, right? So like fostering critical hope for me is doing that equity analysis, recognizing that sometimes you have to put in you have to approach it not from like a naive place of everything's going to be fine and we're all going to be happy in the end. It's like, no, things are not good at this moment, but I have critical hope that as we come together across the field, we can do hard things. And so sometimes that message, I think, and my hope is that, not just the message, but that really brought people together of like, okay, this is a time when a lot of people are leaving higher ed. This is a time when a lot of folks are maybe feeling like, is the work that I'm doing, does it really matter? And how can we kind of regain that sense of this is purposeful and important work? So that's what I would. That's what the one other thing I wanted to add was the focus on critical hope has been kind of a key message of the presidency, but also I think since then I'm like, okay, just let's keep going.
yeah, no, I'll have to definitely put that book in the show notes. But because I think, yeah, like that puts a finer point on it, sort of like bold circles, underlines that idea of like, we have to have sort of optimism, but like kind of strategic optimism. Like you could kind of start to kind of like flesh out that sort of concept of like, well, it needs to be based in realism, sort of like interface and sort of acknowledge like what is happening around us, but also have sort of uh that motivation and kind of the hope to um be able to address those challenges, make things better, and bring people together to do that. Because I think it's like we create many of our own problems, so that means we can also fix them. And like, and I think that acknowledgement that you made too is that like that sort of blind optimism in the sense of like uh, just the being unaware or not acknowledging the problem, because like I think that's what people have remarked a lot now is sort of the culture of higher ed that has gotten us to this point where you're seeing like institutions closing maybe like several a month at this point. Like there's this common refrain or sort of impression that people get is that sort of like, well, it'll all work out in the end, it always kind of has, I don't know, like, and it's that idea like you're sort of letting go of responsibility, you're letting go like and all these sort of things, because it's like, well, we've always been here, so I assume will always continue to be here. But it's like, to me, it's almost just like have some like humility in the sense of like none of these institutions like deserve to exist, like it's like, I mean, it's only so much as like public institutions for sure have these sort of like mandates from their states and whatever else. So it's like there's kind of like a point in a sense to them existing, but then like a lot of the institutions that you're seeing close are these, private liberal arts institutions or smaller ones or, whatever else. So it's like, they think that it's all just going to work out. But I think, you know, it only will work out when, folks come together to make it so. Um, I guess it's sort of, then we'll kind of have our final question after this, but just, reflecting on, as you did, like, 100 years of ACPA, a lot has changed in that time. How do you see the organization's role in the field right now and moving forward? Because I guess it is that idea of like one part of it is sort of cultivating that, that critical hope and everything. So like, uh, yeah, I guess like, how do you see, I guess, moving forward, like an organization like ACPA helping to kind of continue to be of support?
ACPA's tagline is boldly transforming higher education, right? And I think throughout their 100-year history, they have stepped into those conversations with a lot of um, not only hopefulness, but strategy around what we can do. And so the strategic imperative for racial justice and decolonization is an example of the way that when we have looked at the pressure points that are facing the field, there are some really specific things that can be done, and I think ACPA has focused on building those resources for professionals, for faculty, for aligning the scholarship with the practice, and then advocating for the policies, right? So alongside other higher ed associations, like how can we collectively together, through our membership in some of the um, Washington D.C. collectives, kind of advocate for the type of change that we want to see. And so ACPA is really at the forefront of that, always kind of considering the governmental policy components. And we have in our new governance structure a whole section of our leadership council that's focused on that, which I think will be a really important next kind of phase. So we've been like thinking right now in April there are 60 different campuses that have encampments, protests happening, and ACPA is putting together resources and supports for folks who work in student affairs and higher ed in supporting students and supporting students' free speech and expression. And so I think it's that practical application, prioritizing um, student success, student well-being, student support, and then I think we'll kind of continue to innovate and lead. We also know that our field is evolving, as we have generational shifts and changes, and we have, more, I'm Gen X, but more millennials moving into leadership roles. I think the type of organization of, there is a flattened structure and there is a place for everyone to get involved and connected, has been one of the things that I've really appreciated from the moment that I first arrived back at ACPA after that 1 year where I was invited to present. I got involved. And so I think ACPA will continue to find ways to be a member driven association. We have an incredible international office staff, but it's a smaller staff because volunteer leadership is so fundamental to our work as an association moving forward. So I think it's going to be a really exciting next 100 years. There's so many different things on the horizon that I think, as we kind of consider, just a shifting of the nature of our work, the way that hybrid professional development opportunities have evolved, our doubling down in things like the residential curriculum, right, and the Institute for the Curricular Approach. Like all of that, I think has really set ACPA up for being successful, for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's interesting to hear just the different things that you all are working on to be responsive again to like just the very sort of uh I guess it's sort of like the micro thing, the idea of like, well, these 60 institutions are doing all this stuff. It's like, but that is something that's like rippling out to all institutions. So like, yeah, we do want to acknowledge and be responsive to that and all that. And then even just sort of the leadership hierarchy of where you're sort of deploying folks and the volunteers and different things like that also being kind of responsive, because I think like I do imagine the next several years will be heavily informed by federal policy changes and different that so I think that is a smart move to kind of double down on like obviously yeah like the headquarters is in DC. It's like, well, let's kind of keep empowering that work and trying to, um, yeah, be like a strong kind of advocacy organization and everything. But um, you'll wrap up, I guess, just given all that we have discussed, your ACPA presidency sort of helping to kind of shepherd the field through these tumultuous times and, the podcast and all the conversations you have and everything. Want to just wrap it up with just like, what advice would you give to other higher ed leaders right now? I mean, part of it is sort of the hope, the optimism, the being kind of realist and sort of kind of getting your hands dirty and like doing the work and trying to make things better. But like, so if you want to elaborate more on that or just other advice that you would have for higher ed leaders right now.
I've spent a lot of time, in addition to thinking about critical hope, also thinking about the sustainability of our field and what we need to do to make it so that this is a profession and a field and a vocation that people want to stay in. Because I've seen in my career um, amazing colleagues like jumping outside of traditional higher ed, and like some of those adjacent roles are really vital to our continued work, right? And also, on my campus, we're losing folks who, I think have a lot to give. And so for me, some of the advice I would have is really kind of recognize that giving people who are already good at their job more work may not be ultimately sustainable, right? And how do we make sure our institutions are supporting whole people, not just those who have endless amounts of time to give, right? I mean, I have two kids. I have a first year student at the University of Michigan, a high school student um, as well. And, my life is full and in addition to my job, right? And so I think that kind of cultivation of environments that are human centric, right? They're designed with human interface in mind. Like we're not here making widgets, right? We're engaging, and staff who are effective in their roles are also whole people, and they will be better for serving students if we can take care of them. So that's probably the big thing that I've been thinking about, not just regarding the field broadly, but in my own role on my own campus and the staff that I get the opportunity to work alongside is that grace and also ability to have empathy. And I don't say resilience, like we all just need to have grit and kind of put double down on the work, but like there has got to be equity in our work in terms of the amount of effort that we're expected to give from time to time. And it is also, I will say, Tuesday after finals week on our campus, and graduation was just this past weekend. So I think our collective campus is doing a bit of a deep breath and a deep sigh. I know other campuses are still in the middle of winding up their time. I actually have this incredible opportunity to go abroad in a couple of weeks. I take a group of undergraduate students to Europe for 3 weeks, and so that also has been really interesting to me. So sometimes my other piece of advice was getting outside of the US context and seeing how higher education and student affairs functions in other places of the world. That's been really instrumental in me kind of thinking about like, how are we supporting students, and what are students' motivations for coming into American colleges and universities. The incredible privilege of being able to go away for 4 years and live, whereas a lot of campuses are very much centered around the community. And so I get a lot of energy from being with the college students on my campus, but I think we collectively learn a lot through our engagement with our colleagues who are in the Netherlands and Belgium and Germany and France, which is where I will be in in the month of May. So yeah, that's kind of what I would say as a wrap up.
Amazing. Yeah, that sounds like a great trip. And I mean, just those opportunities for just sort of like really kind of intensive or deep sort of interactions with the students and yeah, the examination of higher ed in other contexts is certainly helpful. And I think it's even just the idea of like, well, we don't have to take like 3 week sojourns out to Europe to do that. I think it's the idea of like professional communities like ACPA or whatever sort of scratches your itch. It's like a lot of them are obviously like bringing in people from all over the world, whether they like work and live somewhere else or maybe just have sort of a connection. It could be like, yeah, like try to like, get out there and talk with folks about like their sort of experiences in higher ed, maybe as a student somewhere else in the world. Maybe they did like study abroad or whatever it might be. But that is definitely good advice. And I think yeah, that idea of building kind of organizational cultures in higher ed to be more supportive, because it's like, yeah, it's hard times, and if we can make our employees, our staff, our faculty's lives easier as colleges and universities, I think that provides more of that sort of like resiliency versus just sort of like yeah, the like grit and just sort of grit and bear it and deal with it and just push forward. It's like that has been kind of the notion, is like just do the work and it's just overwhelming and it's stressful and you're getting burnt out or whatever. It's like, well, if you give that grace, give that space, give maybe opportunities to sort of uh expand your horizons and whatever else, it's like try to kind of thread that needle of like uh giving people what they need when they need it, how they need it, and that would, I think, just help with yeah, the kind of sustainability of the field, because yeah, it's like we need a lot of good people doing the work, and um it does take leadership of these institutions to um recognize the value of what those folks are contributing and being um yeah, just more supportive with all just the compensation, benefits, perks, and all the above. So um
Yeah, and I'm super grateful. I mean, I would not be able to do this without the support, right, of my supervisor and larger team, because it is a lift on their end to, and also it contributes, right? So there's like this mutual piece here, but yeah, I'm really it is definitely not lost on me that not everybody has the opportunity. But also people are like, oh, 3 weeks vacation in Europe. I'm like, no, 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 no. Spending 3 weeks with 18-year-old, 18 to 22-year-old students, 18 of them, right? Is it is it's a deep dive into what student culture is today, and also kind of getting the opportunity to kind of learn alongside them and learn from them. I was not a Snapchat user, for example, until I went on my first study abroad with students, and I was like, wait a second, I really need to know how to use this more effectively. So now I'm on Snapchat.
Yeah, it is. Uh, I'm surprising how like durable Snapchat has been. I guess is just a weird little ending footnote here. Is like the idea of like something like ACPA has been around for 100 years, and Snapchat's been around longer than I ever thought it would be. Like if you build something that people appreciate, it'll stick around. But yeah, that's something I forget too. Of like when I, because like conferences, it's sort of the same way. We're like, oh, cool, you get to like go on a vacation to like wherever the conference is being held. One, it's like, well, it shouldn't be, but then two, I forget that like the people organizing it's like, oh, you're working, because I'm like, oh, hey, like cool event, like love what you're doing, whatever, and I'm just trying to like chit chat with them. It's like, oh yeah, you're trying to like organize all this, like this is your work. This for me is sort of a like, it is fun, but this sort of professional learning experience. But so yeah, it's just whatever, whether it's like you like being the person like doing it, or whatever sort of perceptions that people have to deal with of like, oh yeah, like vacation. But so yeah, good luck with organizing all of that and keeping everybody together. And yeah, I mean, it is one of those things where it's like, yeah, you wouldn't be able to do that without supportive leadership. And I'm glad that you are getting that opportunity, and glad that you are one of those supportive leaders helping to lead the field. And appreciate you doing the podcast and everything else that you do. We'll have ways to connect with you and what we talked about in the description for the episode here. But just thanks for hanging out and thanks for sharing all you did.
Of course. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks so much.